Anybody have any question from yesterday? Yes.
I remember yesterday you said austerity for the sake of austerity is not good, but austerity for Krishna consciousness is good. But at the time I was thinking that when a person is practicing Krishna consciousness, whatever austerity they do, they consider that it is for their Krishna consciousness. So how do we decide?
Good question. Because the idea is any austerity is good because it reduces sense gratification. So it would be good for my Krishna consciousness. Not exactly, because it may not be in line with the austerity recommended. Or it may be that by doing that austerity, you're minimizing some other service or sadhana. Or like, all right, so I'm going to do the austerity of staying up tonight. So they asked Prabhupada about that. Like on Kadasi, Prabhupada said that's fine as long as you don't sleep the next day.
Yeah.
So I did the austerity, I stayed up all night, and then at 5 in the morning I went to sleep and I got up at 11 o'clock. So what was the point? I minimized my service. So Prabhupada's point was, what's the use of austerity if it minimizes your service? So it was, in and of itself, it was an austerity. You gave up your sleep. But then it's not pleasing to Krishna because you didn't do your service. So you have to, like, there's this story where a devotee wanted to go on book distribution, but he was Prabhupada's servant. And he asked Prabhupada, can I go? And Prabhupada said, you can go, but you won't get my blessings for going. So book distribution is an austerity. It's just in this situation, Prabhupada didn't want him to go. So now the austerity is not pleasing. There's another story, a devotee, a disciple of Bhakti Siddhanta wanted to do Ganga Parikrama, the whole Ganga from Gomut all the way down to the ocean. And he was a sannyasi, and Bhakti Siddhanta didn't want him to do it. Bhakti Siddhanta didn't want him to do it. And somehow or other he did it. Sometimes it happens that you really want to do something and your spiritual master doesn't want you to do it and you do it anyway. So he did it, and that was an austerity, no doubt. And when he came back, Bhakti Siddhanta took away his sannyas for disobeying him. So, the austerity has to be pleasing to Krishna, has to be in line with the Guru. And so we can say in general austerity is good because it minimizes bodily needs, it reduces sense gratification, it gives one strength. But I was reading before I came over here that Prabhupada was saying the main austerity for us, like the global austerity, is following the 4 regulative principles. That's where it starts. So for a Westerner, if they can do that, that's really good. Because I was told by a godbrother that Prabhupada said in the early days, which we found it difficult to understand. Maybe for you it's not difficult to understand. He said, Prabhupada said if someone could follow the 4 regulative principles through their whole life without falling, that's very special, very rare. At that point we were all following, so we didn't understand. So Prabhupada's making the point that to do that your whole life is not easy, and that's the austerity. And austerity in this sense means maybe I'm weak, maybe I can't follow, maybe I don't feel like following, but I follow anyway. That's the austerity. I don't want to do it, but I do it because I promised. So let's say you weren't good at following the 4 principles, but you did other austerities. So it's like, better do this austerity and don't worry about those other austerities. That first get this. So I think that's important also to understand. What are the most important austerities? Like, where should you put your energy into austerity? Rather than just like, I like to do this austerity. But is that what's most important? That's what Prabhupada wants. Like I was saying yesterday, how Prabhupada really stressed the austerity of preaching, like more than anything. And so for us, that's where we put out most of our austerity Shakti, we put into preaching. Like young men living in a van, 4 together, sleeping on the floor, bathing wherever, outside in the winter. So those were austerities that came along with the job, and so therefore we felt, well, this is important because this is what Prabhupada wants us to do. We're approaching people that are antagonistic. That's a big austerity. And then, as I was saying, any kind of austerity that would minimize our ability to preach, we wouldn't do, because we consider that like ignorant. Okay, it's the middle of the winter in Europe, I'm going on Sankirtan, and I'm just gonna drink soup for breakfast, just, liquid soup, nothing in it. What's the point? You'll go out and freeze and be hungry. And that'll get in the way of your service. So that was kind of how Prabhupada taught us about austerity. So, does it help? Is it helping you or is it inhibiting you? Now, sometimes the topic of fasting would come up. Because some devotees were fasting, and then other devotees thought, well, that's not really what Prabhupada recommended, just fasting anytime. Like more for health. So Prabhupada said, of course, any reduction of eating is good, so fasting is good. But if the result of fasting is you can't do your service, then what's the point? I fasted all day. Well, what did you do today? I slept. Oh, congratulations on your fast. What's the point? So then it's a question of understanding what's the greater austerity, going out and distributing Krishna consciousness or fasting. And so the answer is going out. Now, if you can do both, all glories to you. I had a godbrother that on every Ekadasi he would fast, and he would do Sankirtan all day. And he was very austere. And that was his nature, and he could do it, and he liked doing it. So that's glorious. Yeah? Who can think of a useless austerity? Can anybody think? Yeah.
I know every party there's a lot of devotees that just let their hair grow, or like through Chaturmasya, but it's actually not, you're not really doing anything, you're just letting it grow. I remember my ex used to do it, and I was like, I thought it was the nails and everything was useless.
Well,
there's something with me about that.
yeah. Well, it's also interesting. I mean, it brings up a question. Should we do austerities that Prabhupada didn't do or didn't recommend? If that's a general austerity. I mean, sometimes it's uncomfortable to have a beard. But the idea, as far as I understand, was not so much the discomfort, it was just that there was no attention on the body, taking the attention away from the body. But of course, you might think you look good, so then you're putting more attention on the body by, you're missing the point of austerity. But I think at least we should consider when we're doing austerity, if it's something Prabhupada didn't do, at least consider if it's advisable to do it. And as we said the other day, is it something I can, does it have a function of purifying me, and can I maintain it? And what's the point of it? So that tradition was there in Gaudiya Math. They did that. Prabhupada never introduced that. We didn't find out about it, because Prabhupada said do it. It's in his books, or we found out. I don't know how we found out exactly. But it wasn't anything that he specifically instructed. So that's also interesting, to do something he didn't ask us to do. Yes?
Once I heard a devotee was fasting, even trying to control his breath and breathing slowly just because his urine was sick, that he wanted the benefit of that should go to his holy system.
If he has the Shakti to do that, if he can do it, but who can do that? I don't know. Yeah, if he could do that, yes. Sometimes, when Prabhupada was sick, the devotees would say, Prabhupada, take my youth. I'll take the old age. So it's a natural desire that we all had. We could sacrifice our health. That would be wonderful. But none of us had the power to do that. We didn't know how to. I mean, maybe if someone knew how to, that would have been a glorious service. But what we did pray. That's what Prabhupada asked. So in relation to this question about austerity, we should be conscious of what austerity Prabhupada asked us to perform also, rather than just do something that may not be pleasing. Right? But in general, austerity is good. But first austerity, follow your initiation vows. That's the first austerity. Or follow the 4 principles. Chant 16 rounds, that's the first austerity. That's the main austerity. And then give Krishna consciousness. We were saying yesterday, rise early. You want me to read what Prabhupada said? Rather than hear it from me? Hear it directly. Of course, I have to find it. No, I can't find it now. Anyway, that's what he said. Okay, any other question? From yesterday or the day before? Or the week before?
If you can clarify, this is not connected with the question, another question. Because sometimes devotees say that in Ekadashi, turmeric is not allowed because it can contain some flour and sativa also. But other devotees say that Prabhupada says that don't be too complicated.
Don't be fanatical. Don't be fanatical. She's asking on hing may have some flour, or turmeric may have some flour, and so we shouldn't eat it on the goddess. And then she's saying that she heard Prabhupada said, "Don't be fanatical." I think that was in relation to corn syrup, using corn syrup on the goddess. Well, I think if you can follow it, follow it. Yeah. If for some reason you were in a situation and there was a Ekadasi and you needed to eat and there's nothing to eat and it had turmeric in it, then that would be the don't be fanatical side. You have to eat something. But Prabhupada was not so fanatical about these things. Thank you. Historically, I was told that if you study religious history, you'll find out that followers tend to be more fanatical than the founders of religion. The people who come after tend to be more fanatics. So that's something to consider. But, if you can follow, there's no reason not to follow. But I think it was maybe a circumstantial situation. There was nothing to eat. Prabhupada said, don't be fanatical.
I heard that specifically one devotee asked what should we avoid such things on Ekadashi, and he said, don't become too complicated.
Yeah. So, if it's too complicated, then... If it's not too complicated, yeah. Well, this is a whole other topic. But in America, during Prabhupada's time, they put fish oil in the milk. Do they do that still? In your milk? You don't know.
No one knows.
I mean, it didn't say fish oil. It said something like, what, vitamin D or something?
Yeah, it's
Still?
probably, but you have to trace, you have to know where
Yeah.
it's coming from.
So, anyway, they found out if they were putting fish oil and they told Prabhupada. And he basically said that in Kali Yuga, nothing is pure. So he didn't tell us to stop using it. So that's kind of amazing, isn't it? It's not, I'm not saying you use that as a license to compromise your principles, but the fact is he said it. So it's interesting that he wasn't that fanatical. Personally, I would avoid milk with fish oil. But, if it's prasadam and it's given to me, then, don't be fanatical. Right? What can you do?
Yeah, I just remember yesterday you said during the conference, you said that there were a bunch of quotes or letters or something where Prabhupada spoke about illicit sex or something. This, but then you speak to some other subject. I was just wondering, is there like a file? Not illicit sex, but like sex gratification and grihastha.
Is there a file?
Yeah, but you said something yesterday that there is like, that there was kind of like a set of quotes or he had spoken about this. Or...
In what was the context? You remember?
No. I just remember.
Ha! Ha! I can tell you a story. Oh my God. So it was like 1971 or something, or two. So two of my godbrothers had just got married, so they're like, early 20s. And so this godbrother confided, it was a little difficult for both of them, it was a little difficult for them to perfectly follow the no illicit sex. I mean, they were trying, but they were young men. He said sometimes he slipped. And they were both in the same position. And I don't know how they ended up seeing Prabhupada, but they both went into Prabhupada's room, and Prabhupada only said one thing to both of them. He said, sex once a month after chanting 50 rounds. That's all he said to them. So, I don't know if that answers your question. Isn't that interesting? And embarrassing for them? Yeah. So, then this brings up the question of who can follow and how much can we follow? And I was thinking, we were discussing last night with Galina about a problem that not everybody can reach the highest standard, and a lot of people go away because they can't reach it. And one thing I saw with Prabhupada was he wasn't so emphatic about following it unless you made the vow to follow it. Previous to making the vow, it was different because you hadn't committed yet, so you're not being held responsible. So when someone had taken initiation and they weren't following, he would say, why did you promise if you weren't going to follow? He said, then you shouldn't have promised. In other words, it's not okay you're not following, but it's okay in the sense that at least you didn't promise. So if we're going to promise, then we have to be ready to follow. And if we're not ready to follow, we should wait to promise. And so Prabhupada knows not everybody can follow, but that standard is there for those who want to follow. Or that standard is there to strive for those who want to be Krishna conscious. But once you're initiated, or living in a temple, that's the standard, or supposed to be. So I think it's very important to understand that we don't want to try to do something and strike out and give up. I try to do something that's too hard for us. Because you know the psychology, if you shoot for 10 and get a 9, you feel bad, but if you shoot for 5 and get a 6, you feel good, right? So a lot of devotees will shoot for 10, hit like 7.5, and they'll give up Krishna consciousness because it's not a 10. And a lot of devotees will shoot for 5 and hit 5 and be satisfied because they're being realistic. So if we look at history, then we'll see that many people come shooting for 10. And why are they shooting for 10? Because Prabhupada is teaching us what is pure devotional service. But the problem is they don't understand whether or not they're ready for 10. But it seems like you're supposed to shoot for 10, doesn't it? This is what pure devotional service is. This is how Prahlad Maharaj acted. This is how this devotee acted, and so on and so forth. So you're getting all the 10s. So you think, oh, I'm supposed to be 10. But it's not what Prabhupada means. He means that's the goal, that's the standard. Now, figure out what you can successfully do. Because if you fail at going for 10 and get a 9, you're discouraged. If you succeed at 5, because you're going after 5, you feel good. Oh, I got 5. And so I'm okay now. It's 5. Maybe I'll get 10 in 10 years. But if you want 10 right now, you can get discouraged. So that's really important to understand. Because we lose so many devotees, because they see that high standard and they think, okay, that's the standard. That's the only standard, and I need to come to that. And if you try to come to that standard as a young devotee, and you don't realize that's a gradual process, you'll get discouraged. Just by the nature of our conditioning. Right? So we want to see you around 30 years from now. And if you look at the devotees that are around for 30 years, most of them were shooting for high standards and hitting them. They were, probably from their last life. They were just good devotees. They didn't have like major problems. But if you look at your average people who aren't around, it's because they thought they could or were supposed to reach those standards, and it was artificial for them. I mean, that's not the only reason someone leaves, but that's a very common problem. Right? Yes?
So on this point, what if people are trying to force you to reach a higher standard that you did try to reach, but you're not reaching it?
Yeah.
And now you feel bad because people are trying to measure.
Yeah,
So
right.
how do you...
That's a very good question. She's asking, how do you respond to people who are trying to push you to a higher standard that's beyond what you think you can achieve? I would say, if you process it in the context that I'm talking about, then you can see their intentions are good, and say, okay, thank you for clarifying what the goal is. Because just like for example, you could say Prabhupada's books are doing the same thing. I'm reading his books and it says, this is the standard. So here's Thakur Haridas, he's being beaten and he's praying for the people who are beating him. Now if I compare myself to that, if I were beat, I'd probably be thinking, if I survive, I'm going to kill these guys, right? That would be pretty normal, right? But now I hear about Thakur Haridas and I can't relate to it. And so how do I think about that? And I think that is an ideal that someday I would like to come closer to. And today, maybe I can get 1 inch closer to that ideal. So that's how you have to see. Like, let's say you're learning to play guitar. Okay? Are you learning to play guitar? Maybe? Oh, okay, so. All right. So, if you're learning to play guitar, because I used to play guitar, one of the things you'll do is you'll want to go, well now you can go on YouTube, but when I was young, you'd want to go to a concert and see those guitar players, right? And there's some amazing guitar players, just like, you can't figure out how they're playing, isn't it? But you don't feel like, oh, I'll never play like that next week, so I'll commit suicide. You don't feel that way. You go, I want to play like that. You get inspired, right? Someday I want to play like that. It's an inspiration. So that's how we're supposed to take it, you know. We're telling you pure devotional service, this is how you should be. See it like, you know, that's Jimi Hendrix playing guitar. You know Jimi Hendrix? He was an amazing guitar player. Nobody could figure him out. So if someone's talking about pure devotional service, oh, that's Jimi Hendrix. Takaharidas, that's Jimi Hendrix. You know, I want to be like him someday. But you know you can't be like him tomorrow, and that's not a problem. It's just you're inspired. So that's what Prabhupada's doing. He's inspiring us. But you know you have to practice. And you know you have to get a teacher. And so you're okay with that. It's just when it becomes, it comes into being Krishna conscious, it's different than learning an external skill. It's like who we are. And so we're more inclined to think, I have to be it, and become discouraged when I'm not. I was saying the other day on the morning walk that what we want, I don't know if you were there, what we want is to be happy doing the process. Not my happiness doesn't have to depend on my level of Krishna consciousness. It's just gratefulness to be in the process and relishing the process. Of course, if I'm more advanced, I'll be more blissful. But it doesn't mean if I'm not advanced, I won't be. I can't be. Because I can still relish the process. Right? So you're learning to play guitar, you know, and you're learning to play like Jimi Hendrix or whatever, Stevie Vaughan, whatever his name is. Stevie Ray Vaughan. I don't know. All these amazing guitarists. What's his name?
Was it
Stevie
Ray Vaughan?
Yeah.
From Texas.
Yeah. And so you're playing ding, ding, ding. But you know, at some point it's ding, 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 and you go, well, it almost sounds a little bit like him. Then you're getting inspired. You know, so we should get inspired like that, you know. Today I had this amazing realization that was like, you know, a gift from above. I'm inspired. Something like that. I don't know if that's a good example. Now you're all thinking of all the music of these people. I contaminated you. But I saw Jimi Hendrix when I was like 16 or something. So it was quite amazing. Nobody could figure out how he played guitar, but I play guitar and I was inspired. And then I was, I grew up by the beach, and in those early days, surfing took off in the early 60s, mid-60s. It was in California. It was like in Hawaii. And so these people started making surfing movies, and it showed like all the greatest surfers surfing all around the world. And just amazing, right? And it was the same thing. You'd watch it and you'd get inspired. You go, I want to do what they're doing. So that's the idea. You hear about Takaharidas. I would love to be so forgiving and tolerant that someone's trying to kill me and I pray for them. And you get inspired by that rather than, oh, I never feel that way. It's so depressing. You know, look at how bad I am. You see? So that's how you take that. The people who are pushing you to pure devotional service and like, don't push me. It's too much. No, take it as an inspiration, not as a mandate. Like today you have to do this. Right? And the second thing is, it's just clarifying what it is. What is pure devotional service? Because if you want it, you have to know what it is, right? So you're describing Prahlad Maharaj's pure devotional service. Now you know what it is. So, and now you can look at yourself and say, well, how can I be a little more like that? But I have to know what it is to know. Like, okay, guitar example. Bhaktivedanta Purna Swami gives cooking examples. Because he likes, I'll give guitar examples. You want a little history, music history? I mean, I'm not an expert, but in the south of the United States, black people they had a hard life and they were discriminated against, and they came up with a genre of music called the blues, which was meant to express their emotion through guitar. And so you would feel their depression the way they play guitar, right? And you watch, there was one called B.B. King. He was like the Acharya, you know. And if you ever watch him, you should watch him. But I've seen him also. I saw all these people when I was young. And when they're playing, it's like you see all the emotion, the note and the emotion. It's expressing that pain. That's why they call it the blues, right? My baby left me. You know, so it's expressing that pain, right? So you go and listen to them, and you go and you practice. And you know, and you're practicing over and over and over, and then one day you kind of get it. It sort of sounds like it. Like, wow, it almost sounds like B.B. King, and you get excited, right? So you know, maybe one day you feel a little compassion. You go, wow, I feel like Prahlad Maharaj today. I think I got a drop of it. Rather than being depressed, oh, I'll never play like B.B. King. It's impossible. You see what I mean? You have to know what the standard is, what it's supposed to sound like, what it's supposed to feel like. Otherwise, how do you play it? So what does pure devotional service sound like? What does it feel like? You have to know. But so many of us, when we hear it, we go, oh, I'll never be like that. I'll just hang up my bead bag today. What's the use? You want to hear a funny story? It's not funny, it's sad, but it's interesting. I mean, it's funny in a sad way. So you may know that at japa retreats, you reserve a day for 64 rounds. In some retreats, if they're longer, you'll have 2 or 3 days of 64 rounds. And for many devotees, this is the first time they've ever chanted 64. And a lot of devotees are coming to the japa retreats having chanted some very bad japa in their life. Maybe they hardly ever chanting good rounds. And not having necessarily a taste. And so this one devotee had a very bad day on the 64 round day. And at the end of 64 rounds, you know what she did? She threw her beads. She just, I hate this. She threw her beads. You're so like frustrated, unhappy, discouraged. Because she was seeing the reality of who she was. I don't have a taste. But as they say in India, bata. Is that how they say it? How do you say it? Yes? Bata. We're not supposed to feel that way. So I tried. I did something better next time. Here's another thought. This is a thought that Burjan Prabhu has given us. That, let's say you're chanting and nothing's happening. You ever chanted and nothing's happening? It's like, yeah, Prabhu, that's like my normal japa. Nothing's happening. Just chanting. But you know, sometimes really nothing is happening. You could be chanting Coca-Cola, Hare Krishna, I love you, baby. It's all the same experience. Like nothing's happening. And so he said basically your austerity at that point is to continue chanting, even when there's no taste, as a devotion. So, like Tara, you could say, if you felt discouraged, then your austerity would be to go on even though you're discouraged, and to tolerate that discouragement. That I don't have any realization, I don't have any taste, but I'm going on, that's my austerity. Or I'm chanting my rounds every day, even though there's nothing there. That's my austerity. And he said it could be that Krishna just wants to see, what are you going to do if there's no taste? You're just going to go, well, I'm not going to chant, there's no taste. No, but I'll do it as a dharma. And then Krishna may say, good, I wanted to see if you would do that. Now I'll give you a taste. So that's possible, right? So that is definitely an austerity, right? To continue in bhakti when there's no taste, right? And Krishna may purposely take away the taste just to see what you're going to do. Oh, you have no taste, so you're going to give up? What kind of bhakti is that? Yes? So that's an interesting thought. So, when you go home tonight, look up B.B. King. Get your guitar out, see if you can do it. And you'll understand what I mean. Isn't it like when you're a kid and you can like learn something just a little bit, you get really excited, isn't it? So we should have that same excitement. Right? Something. So it's a very good question because we all have to deal with this reality that we're going to hear classes, we're going to be inspired by people who are talking about pure devotional service, and we're going to read stories of pure devotees. And how do you relate to it without becoming discouraged? Because you could be discouraged, right? If this is the standard, that could be depressing. But it's meant to inspire. Maybe I can't be like Prahlad Maharaj tomorrow, but maybe I could be a little more like him today, right? Maybe I've got some issue with my father. Maybe I could be a little more kind to him. Take inspiration from Prahlad, like something. Right? Maybe there's somebody that mistreated me. Maybe I could let that go. That's like, I can't be Prahlad Maharaj, but maybe I could do that. So that's the idea. Is there something I could do to be a little more like him? So then take it as inspiration, not take it like, oh, you're discouraging me because I can't be like that. Because we have to preach pure devotional service. And my whole philosophy of preaching is to let people adopt Krishna consciousness according to where they're at and their own inspiration. Because Prabhupada said that. He said, you preach, but then you let people come. And like I can preach to you, Tara, this is pure devotional service. But I don't get behind your back at 2:30 in the morning and pour cold water on you. I just tell you, it's very inspiring to get up early, your rounds will be better, and so on. Then I go home, and you do what you do. You take that in, and you do what you do. That's what Prabhupada said. I don't come over and knock on your door. 2:30, you should get up. So, still we have to inspire, right? We have to preach what is pure bhakti. And so I'm very much, in my preaching, allowing people to come wherever they're at whatever speed they're at. But sometimes my preaching is very like, this is pure devotional service, this is what you should do. But internally I'm not thinking everybody has to do this. This is the goal. And this is what you should strive for. And you do it at your own speed. Because if I force you, it's artificial and you can't maintain it. And if you can't maintain it, it's actually worse to try and fall than to just be steady. I told you about did I tell you last week about this man who comes to the LA temple every evening for like the last 400 years? And if you go to LA temple every few years, there's all new faces, and new people, and very few of the original. I mean, I was in LA in 1972. It was like, I don't think there's anybody, maybe one or two from that era. I was there back in 1975. I was there in 1979. So I've seen all the shifts. I went back in 1995. There's very few people there. But this one guy, he's still there. Well, he's probably dead now, but he was never chanting 16 rounds, never a devotee, but he'd come to evening arati. So that made a big impression on me. And that so many people came and, rocket ships that crash landed, and this guy was just, walking up the stairs very slowly. And 20 years later, he's still there. And he's in a better position than so many who were, Jai Prabhu! Hare Krishna! Because they couldn't maintain it. So that's very important to understand. Very important. So it's a balance between this inspiration to be a pure devotee and then understanding what you're capable of. That's the whole point of this class. Based on this reality that many, many devotees tried to go too far, too fast, and they couldn't do it, and they became discouraged. or they weren't being realistic. Their intentions, I'm sure, were good, but they weren't realistic. So, yeah. I was just talking to a godbrother, he's in Italy, and Italy was one of the greatest places to preach in the 70s, 80s. It was amazing. You may know Villa Vrindavan in Florence, Firenze. I mean, there were like there were 15 devotees there. It's a huge castle. There were 200 to 300 devotees living there in the 80s. People were joining, like anything. So he said, now nobody will join. They'll come to the temple, they'll come to programs. No one will move in the ashram. It's a different time, it's a different place. Isn't that interesting? So it's a reality that we're dealing with in the world today. Very few people in the West want to live in ashrams. Right? And many people want to practice Krishna consciousness at home. So it's going to be different. They had, in England in the mid-late 70s, they were making, I think, about 50 new devotees a year, or maybe 100 new devotees a year. And 50 new devotees a year were going on Sankirtan. It's a lot of book distribution, right? Every month there was a new van of 4 brahmacharis going on. Did you know that? Yeah. Soho was making all the devotees. At least 1 or 2 a week were joining. What about now? Right? In Vaisheshika Prabhu, he distributes almost as many books as the big Los Angeles temple, and he has no brahmacharis. It's all with the congregation. So things are different. So if you think, oh, I feel so bad, I'm not living in a temple, I should live in a temple. But it's that you could think that way, but the environment's different now. People don't think that way. When I became a devotee, I was a college student. So my parents were paying for a car, for an apartment, and I was majoring in how to get good grades without going to class. And I did really well at that. So life was good, right? And so school would be a great place to stay. Life was very easy. And when I became a devotee, the last thought of my mind was to stay in school. The only thought of my mind was to move into the temple. And everyone in my generation, that's what they did. Nobody thought of practice Krishna consciousness at home. That thought had no place in our brains. It didn't work. We couldn't do it. It's a different era. So we have to adjust to who we are and where we're at. So if you try to imitate that era and you don't have that mentality, and you read, all the Prabhupada disciples were so surrendered and this and that, it was a different era. You can't exactly imitate it. When I went to Italy to see what they were doing, you couldn't exactly do that in America. Americans are different. In those days in Italy, you just go to any big guy in a big industry and talk to him. And now in Italy, there's so much crime, you can't go door to door anymore. They won't even talk to you. And their whole Sankirtan was door to door in the 80s. Yeah, they were selling sets of books and meeting so many people. It's a different environment, different mentality. Interesting, isn't it? You can't preach the same way anymore. People are different, you're different, I'm different. And I'll tell you another story, it's really funny. You like funny stories. I don't know if you think you're not going to laugh, but it's interesting funny. So I had a godbrother, and he was traveling. He would always travel and preach in different colleges in different towns. And he had we call it a mobile home. You call it in Europe a caravan. It's like a big truck. That's a little house. So when he was in his late 40s, he ended up buying a bus, a full, I don't know what you call them. We call them Greyhound buses. What do you call them?
Coach.
Bus? Coach. Yeah, he bought a coach, like an older coach, and converted it. So he made a bedroom in the back, he had another bedroom, and then an altar in the front, and you could sit like 10 people and have kirtan. So there were some young devotees, and they were looking at this, and he used to have this caravan, which was much smaller. And so one of the devotees was talking to the leader and said, why does Maharaj have to have such a big coach instead of a smaller caravan? And the brahmacharis were just living in vans. So the coach was like, I don't know, 3 times, 4 times bigger than a van. So why does Maharaj need that? Because you think he's a sannyasi, he shouldn't have such nice things. And so the leader of that community said, because he's 48 years old, he's not 22 years old. That was his answer. So you change as you grow, and the kinds of austerities or the levels of austerities will change. So when we were grihastas at 22 years old and you go to our house, there was no furniture, maybe a few cushions, that was about it, maybe no cushions. And that was normal. And we were okay. We were 20 years old. Why do we need furniture? As I said yesterday, the bedroom, there was nothing in it. And then you just throw your sleeping bags on the ground. But for most of those brahmacharis now who are my age, that would be hard to do. Especially for the women, it would be hard to do. So you have to adjust according to what you need. Right? And not be embarrassed or afraid to acknowledge it. And just get it over with and don't think about it. And then move on and do service. That's it. Right? It's okay, this is what I need. Don't get mental. Okay, just get it and forget about it and do your service. Right? That's it. I'm so bad, I sleep on a bed, I'm a sense gratifier, I should be on the floor. Yeah. Sleep on the floor in this weather, you get sick. Right? Isn't it? Okay, I have another story for you. Just to show you how stupid I am. So when I became a devotee, or when I moved in the ashram, not become a devotee, but I moved in the ashram, and when I dressed like a devotee, looked like a devotee, not a devotee, every 3 weeks, you could mark it on the calendar, I would get a cold in the winter. Every 3 weeks. I would get over the cold, 3 weeks later, get the cold. It would take about a week or 10 days to get over it. And then from that point, 3 weeks later, I would get the cold. Right? For 20 years. Right? That happened for 20 years. And one day, the lights went off. Ding, 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 ding. And I finally figured out why I was getting sick. And there were 2 reasons, which is, you're going to look at me and go, you are really stupid. It took you 20 years to figure this out. I wasn't sleeping enough, and I was taking cold showers, like whatever the weather was, it was like that was the cold shower. It's not like, well, it's the middle of winter in Alaska, maybe you could add a little warm water. No, just, Prabhupada said cold shower. So whatever the cold is in this area I'm in, that's what I. So after 20 years, I got this brainstorm. Maybe you should sleep a little more. And maybe you shouldn't take like these ice cold showers. It could just be like cool, like room temperature. Guess what happened? It's extreme, from that day, so we're talking like 20 years, it's extremely rare I ever get a cold. It's like if I ever, and it never lasts for more than 3 days. I never like am down with the cold. But in those days, I was like down. It's like, I'm pretty stupid, right? It took me 20 years to figure that out. So why did it take me 20 years to figure that out? There's all this guilt, you can't sleep more, warm shower, it's all sense gratification. The reality is my body, it couldn't take it. So finally, I just, said, okay, I need to sleep more. And once I slept more and didn't take those cold showers, I was fine. Right? So you understand what I'm saying, right? You get caught in this situation and it's just like so obvious that you shouldn't be doing that, but there's this guilt and shame or whatever you think you're supposed to do, and you think, no, I shouldn't do it. That would be wrong. We have another phenomenon. It's called brahmacharis getting married in their 40s. Why does that happen? Because they were convinced that they're going to be brahmacharis their whole life. Wrongly convinced, misunderstood. So, some man asked me, should I get married or shouldn't I? And he's like 33 or 34, and I say, I don't know, but don't wait too long to decide, because you don't want to decide at 48 that it's time to get married. And I was telling the devotees, every morning we go on a walk. If you want to come outside the Panchatattva entrance, you can come. If you like cold weather, you'll love it. It's nice and humidly cold. So, in the Catholic Church, the dangerous age for the monks is 50 to 65. That's when they have the most trouble. Isn't that interesting? Did you know that? Yeah. Not 23. 50 to 65. So, if a man's thinking, should I get married, shouldn't I don't know. When he's 50 to 65, it could all just knock him over. It's possible. So a lot of us young men, we thought we'll just be brahmacharis our whole life, and then, in 40s or later, we couldn't do it. So you want to know, you want to try to know as best you can. And deal with it, and if that's the case, that's the case. It is. So if it is, it is, and just do it. Go with it. Right? Not like, oh, there's something wrong with me, I'm so bad, or whatever. No, it just is. It's not right or wrong, it just is. So just do it. Right? Or whatever it is. I can't do book distribution anymore. All right, well, I did it for 10 years. Okay, so, what are you going to do now? Do some service. It's okay. If you can do book distribution on the weekends, great. Go on the marathon, great. But don't commit suicide over it. Right? Yes? So in the old days, when someone moved in the ashram, then it was like, okay, you're doing this for life, right? We're not going to let you out of here. We got accused of brainwashing and so on. And when we got smart, it's like, okay, you're doing this for 3 years. We're not going to let you stay in here past 3 years because we want you to go back to college, get your education, and get married, because we don't want you to try to figure that out when you're 42. Because whatever you studied at university is useless by, 20 years later. You're not going to get a job. So, yeah. So, different shift in preaching with all the experience. That in the West, how many men can remain brahmachari for life in the West? India is different. India, they grow up reading about Narada Muni and sadhus, They're like, there's something's in their brain about renunciation. But in the West, it's very rare. How many can do it? Who would like to take a guess at percentages of men who can remain brahmachari their whole life? What's the 1%? Yeah, probably 1% is generous. Because, yeah, I think it's more like, I think it's generous. Probably like 0.025 or something. I don't have figures, but I know who the sannyasis are and I know who the brahmacharis are. There are not a whole lot of them, right? So that's okay. That's fine. It's just what it is. So, someone else have a question? I will. Yes.
A comment because I'm from Norway, and in Norway, 20 years ago, we used to have, it was before my time, but it was like a queue to get into the Sunday feasts.
Really?
It was like such, during Harikish's time, it was such a popular place. And now, by the end of this month, we're closing the temple down because we don't have anyone to run it. We're just going to have Sunday feasts somewhere else.
This is so interesting how people have changed so much. And the people who are preaching they're adapting to that change. And the people whose preaching is succeeding are adapting to that change, and the people whose preaching is failing have not adapted. So they're preaching, they don't know who they're preaching to anymore. Yeah.
Or there's no preachers, usually.
Well, that kind of goes together.
Yeah.
Because if you know how to, anyway, it's a different situation. But that's true in many places. And if you're a preacher and you're preaching in an environment like that, you also have to adjust your mentality to what your goals are. If you think, everybody has to, get initiated within a year and this and that, you won't have people. But if you think, let people adapt according to their position and try to help them understand how Krishna consciousness can help them, then you'll have more people, because that's what they want. And those people aren't coming to our temple, but they're going somewhere. They're going to the Buddhist temple or to some self-development guru, right? Isn't it? Or Deepak Chopra shows up, they're going to him. So it's not that they're going away, they're just, their needs are different. And if we can fulfill those needs in Krishna consciousness, then we'll be relevant.
I remember Mataji said in one lecture in Vrindavan Kartik that we're only, when we're preaching, we're just giving A, B, and C. You have to follow the 4 principles, you have to do this. But what about those who can only follow Y, X, Z?
Exactly.
So even Prabhupada, he said if a devotee or someone came to him, like, I cannot give up meat eating. He said, well, at least don't eat cow. Like we need to adjust.
Of course.
We give something which everyone can follow, not just like the highest.
Yeah. So Bhakta Burfi is giving the Sunday feast lecture. First thing he says is, women only have 32-ounce brains. The next thing he says is, we didn't go to the moon. And the third thing he says is, illicit sex is for dogs. And any questions? So that's kind of, Now, maybe in 1969, that would have worked. People like, they didn't go to the moon. Yeah, everyone's a dog. Yeah. It could have worked, but it's not relevant, It's such an interesting point. That's a whole different discussion. But to me, it shows that things are different, people are different, we're all different. You can't compare yourself to people of another generation, right? And comparing yourself to other people can prove to be very depressing. So it's better to find out who you are and what your contribution is than compare yourself to somebody else, right? Unless you like being depressed. And if you like being depressed, then I would suggest you compare yourself to someone else, especially very advanced devotees, because then you'll become really depressed when you find that you can't be like that. You agree? That's a really good way to be depressed. Yes?
I was thinking about this session. But what happens if we get into this too mild mood?
Get what?
Too mild, not just too...
In our own devotional service? In our preaching? Oh, watered down too much?
Yeah, and then wouldn't that be a danger that people may feel they never have to get to that point, actually follow it?
Yeah. That requires expertise. What people need, how much they can take, what will inspire them to continue in Krishna consciousness. Ultimately, each of us is going to have to deal with our own preaching and make decisions on how to best communicate Krishna consciousness. So, if I communicate Krishna consciousness purely and everybody goes away, I can't say, well, at least I gave them the philosophy and I didn't compromise. I can't say that. I have to say, I'm a failure. They all went away. If they don't go away and I didn't give them any Krishna consciousness and that's why they didn't go away, I just flattered them and made them feel good, then I've also failed. So the challenge is how to give them Krishna consciousness, and at the same time make it so relevant and inspiring and practical that they want more. I'll show you, I can explain the way I'm doing it, because I always think about these things, and I observe the failings of preaching because people are different. They're just so different than we were, our generation. So I developed you could call it a spiritual quotient, like spiritual intelligence. It's a list of questions to analyze your level of spirituality. So we have an introductory course, and people answer. There's like 20 questions about how well do you control your senses, how well do you control your anger, if somebody disturbs you, how easily do you get disturbed, how able are you to accept situations you can't control, like questions like this, which are both about them as individuals, but they all relate perfectly to Krishna consciousness. So there's Krishna conscious solutions. And so they analyze their situation, and they see all their weaknesses. And then we say, well, come back to our workshop because we will help you. We will give you spiritual solutions to these problems. So it's completely relevant. So we didn't compromise because the solutions will be Krishna conscious. But we are using Krishna conscious means to help them practically. So, and I do that because I know if we don't do that, they'll go somewhere else. And other people will do it through another process. And so they'll go there. So it's up to us to use our intelligence how to do it. Right? Or I'll ask people, I'll say, what's a problem you're having in your life you need help with? Or something you need to let go of. So they'll think of it and I'll say, okay, well let's chant. And you pray through this mantra to let go. Because it's practical. And they'll chant and they'll get power to detach. And they'll go, oh, this chanting works. It's powerful. So it's practical. How is this chanting going to help me? It'll help you let go of this attachment that's getting in the way of whatever it's getting in the way of. And so that's another way of experiencing the power of the holy name. Oh, if it works, continue chanting. And they'll get purified. So you just have to think how to get in. What you say is true. You have to be careful. But the real thing is you have to understand people's mentality. Can I read the question this devotee had? Is anyone dying to ask a question? Okay. This is from yesterday's class. You said Patanjali is saying that we may become addicted to activities which give us pleasure. So we should minimize such activities to not become addicted. In other words, well, it was attachment develops as a result of getting pleasure from doing something. That's what he said. So if anything gives you pleasure, you become attached to it. And if you think of anything you're attached to, it's because it has given you pleasure in the past. And so when you think of it, there's an attachment. If it gives you pain, when you think of it, there's a detachment. She says, I understand, but I notice that often we have to get to the point of being, her English isn't her first language, overeaten, meaning to become sick of doing something, like eat so many laddus you get sick. Become sick of doing something and don't feel any pleasure of doing it. And then she says, just like becoming free from sex desire, that many devotees, grihastas, weren't able to control it, but now that they're older, they're over it. So my question is minimizing pleasure can really make us free? If we will have little pleasure, it can be kind of an appetizer, and we will constantly search for more. Both sides of the equation are true. So, You all have to decide how many ladus you need to eat every day and how many ladus will get you sick, so that someday you don't want to eat ladus anymore. Then it's going to be different. For Sonal, it's a half a ladu.
I'd like to replace it with something else.
All right. She's getting over ladus at an early age. For someone else, it's 2 ladus. For someone else, it's 1 ladu a week. But if the goal is to eventually not eat ladus, then you figure out how many do I need to eat a week so that maybe in a few years I won't want ladus. If ladu is an object of attachment you'd like to detach from, but you can't detach yet. So you have to individually decide what's necessary. And so the trick is how to do it without becoming addicted, so that you can gradually give it up. That's the trick part. And as we were saying, I think we were saying yesterday in the beginning of class, if the goal is to give up ladus, then when I'm eating it, it's not like the goal is to enjoy eating it. The goal is just to satisfy that need to eat it because I want to give it up, which is different. Otherwise, you'll have the Rajneesh philosophy. Just go for it. Just enjoy till you get sick of it. And that's not Prabhupada's philosophy. Just do it, Whatever it is you want to do, just do it until you get sick of it. That could happen. But it could backfire. And, how can you engage in sinful activity and become Krishna conscious? So it's up to each of us as individuals to understand what we need and then do it. Say, I need this, but I'm not doing it to enjoy. I'm doing it to satisfy the need, so that need won't get in the way of my devotional service. Right? Like that's why Prabhupada said, or not that he said, but that's why sometimes the statement Grihastha life is a license for sense gratification is misunderstood. What Prabhupada said by sense gratification, he meant it's a license for sex. It's not a license for your whole life to be full of sense gratification. Right? And the purpose, or one of the purposes of Grihastha life is eventually become detached. Right? So even if you're enjoying, it's not like you're enjoying, but you're enjoying to get over the desire to enjoy. Oh, that's weird. But okay, well, there's a class here on Grihastha life that's given by the Grihastha team in America, and it's based on a book, and the book is entitled Strengthening the Bonds That Free Us. And the theory is, if you have a good Grihastha life, you'll become detached. If you have a bad Grihastha life, you'll become attached. Good Grihastha life, everything's good. You'll actually become detached because you'll become satisfied over time. So, strengthening the bonds that free us. The good relationship will free you. If you never had a good relationship, then you're 50 years old, you want to get married again because your relationship was so bad. So we misunderstood that in the early days of the movement, and one sannyasi used to find incompatible couples and marry them because he thought it would be so hellish they would become detached. This is a true story. Welcome to ISKCON 1983. If you joined in the 90s, you saved yourself a lot of weird scenarios, because that was, and it's a true story. So, Grihastha has a nice relationship. It's not for sense gratification, but in having that nice relationship, it's fulfilling that need. So when they're older, the need is fulfilled and detachment comes naturally. If the need is, you're 60 years old and you still haven't fulfilled your need for ladus because you never ate good ladus. It's like the ladus you ate were just not good, and finally you eat a good ladu. It's like, oh my God! And then you just eat 100 ladus next month. Something like that. So why does a 50-year-old guy leave his wife and run after the 25-year-old girl? Right? because he was eating, he never got good ladus. So you might think, oh, it's good, he didn't get good ladus, so he'll detach from ladus. No, he wants to eat ladus even more. But if he had good ladus and didn't eat too many, then when he's 50, he's like, I'm sick of ladus. I never want to see another ladu in my life. Not that you would deal with your husband or wife that way, but you understand the principle. It's not I'm fulfilled, I've got that out of my blood. So that's why you have to be realistic about your needs. And do it in a way that helps your Krishna consciousness. So now I'm getting married and I'm doing the Grihastha ashram, but I'm not doing it for sense gratification. I'm only doing it for sense gratification because I need some sense gratification, but I'm really doing it to be Krishna conscious. That's the purpose. And if I need the sense gratification, it's ultimately not to enjoy, but it's ultimately just to satisfy that need so that I don't have that need later, which is a different way of doing it than non-devotees, right? That's the idea. Does that make sense? Not easy. Easier said than done, right? Because if your husband's as beautiful as I am, and as nice as I am, you become attached, right? So it's easier said than done. But to be attached is not bad. It's made to look out. It's made. It seems that it's bad, but it's not bad if the attachment breeds Krishna consciousness and stability. That you see. Okay, I'll give you an example. This you've probably seen this. I don't know if the men notice this, but I'm sure the women notice this. There's some brahmachari, he can't figure out how to match his socks, One part of his dhoti is over his knee, his sikha's like all over the place, his tilak is, in every direction. Holes in his kurta. You've seen those kind of brahmacharis? Have you seen them? Yeah.
Yes.
They're around here. His room is a mess, It's like same bead bag for like 43 years. Looks like cheese, holes in it. You seen it? And then he gets married, and his wife like dresses him, and they have a nice house, and it's clean, and his socks match, and he's like, and he's actually okay, and he's happier, and he's like normal, and I've seen that, It's funny to see it, but I've seen it. So it was like a major upgrade for him to get married. It was, the brahmachari says, oh, you're getting married, the dark well, you'll never get out, your spiritual life is finished. So that may be in a philosophical sense, but in a practical sense, oftentimes you see it was like a major upgrade for him, and he's like okay, he's normal. And I've seen this with some brahmacharis that I was close with that were like never thought of getting married, but at one point something happened or they met that woman, and then after they got married, they realized that was so much missing from their life. They needed that, but they never knew that. And once they got it, they understood it, and it was actually helping them. So marriage is just an example, but you could use anything as an example. Maybe not anything, but you understand what I'm saying. But the marriage isn't about sense gratification. It's just about that's what they needed. So they don't look at it like sense gratification. But when I come home, I look into my wife's eyes and say, "You're so beautiful." And whenever I look at you, my heart melts. It's not like that. It's not like he's writing poetry, romantic poetry, about how much in love he is. That might be there to some degree, but that's not the center. The center is that how nice it is that we can serve together and how satisfied. Does that make sense?
So
Yes.
What you just said about, adjusting the ladus,
Yes.
how is that compatible with once a month 50 rounds? For some people that is too less. Especially
All right, so if once a month 50 rounds is too less, not enough, don't get in it, then either don't get initiated right away, or if you want to get initiated, tell that to your guru and see what he says. And if he says, okay, we'll talk about it, we'll make some adjustment, and you think, okay, I can deal with that, you make some adjustment. Or if he says, no, that's it, that's what Prabhupada said and that's it, then probably wait. to get initiated. And if you're already initiated, then that's another. Then it's just, you have to deal with it. If I say anything more, as I mentioned last time, I'll get in trouble. And I like to say in this scenario, ask your guru, because then I don't have to say anything. But I would love to say a million things about this, because I think this is one of the most important topics, and I did say some things, and which I feel are important, but they're not things that Prabhupada said, so it's not proper for me to speak in a public assembly unless I'm representing exactly what Prabhupada said. So that was what Prabhupada said, 50 rounds. And if you can't do that, you'll have to deal with that somehow, through getting senior guidance or discussing with your guru, like how do we do this? Because yes, the goal is to be able to not have that need at some point. And that is probably the strongest need. I can't speak for women, but for men, that's the strongest need. So it has to be dealt with in a way that we can overcome it. And so the sad reality is, if it's not satisfied, it may not go away. And the sad reality is that once a month, 50 rounds until the wife is pregnant may not be enough. Just, I'm just being realistic. Now, for Prabhupada would say, for a sincere, surrendered sadhaka, he can do that. But if you're not a sincere, surrendered sadhaka on a high level, it's going to be a challenge. It can be a challenge. I don't want to say it will be, but it can be. I'll put it mildly. It can be. And so it's a big question, and it really needs a whole seminar in and of itself to deal with.
There are so many stories of, not stories, but like scenes or episodes of where devotee couples, maybe one situation where the Prabhu, he did not want his wife to fall down from the principle, so he searched
Another woman.
for a lover instead.
Yeah. Definitely, yeah. Prabhupada said in previous times there were prostitutes to fulfill that need, and men married many women to fulfill that need. But, Prabhupada wanted us to be Brahmins and sadhus. So you could look at it in this way: until you're ready to be a Brahmin and a sadhu, then, just be what you can be, and then when you're ready to be a Brahmin and sadhu, then you can follow that. I mean, it may be that ISKCON will come to that standard where they say, okay, we don't want to initiate anybody till they're like 50 and their kids are grown up. I have a friend who's a doctor, and he said after the woman has a kid, her sex desire goes down. I don't know. I'm not a woman, I can't say. But if that's true, it's certainly true for men as they get older, so then it would be easier. So ISKCON could come to that point where they don't want to push people into such high standards when they're young because it's so difficult. They might say, okay, take initiation after your kids grow up. Or if you're a brahmachari, let's wait till at least you're 40. And we'll see how you're doing, and then we'll talk. It could come to that. Then you don't have this question. It's not even an issue, because the only people getting initiated are able to follow, and they're already over their child-rearing years. So I can't predict the future, but I wouldn't be surprised if that happened. I mean, the only other option is to redefine the fourth regulative principle. So if you redefine it as sex within marriage, then it's no problem, right? No discussion anymore. So either you're going to redefine it, and GBC has not redefined it, and they don't want to redefine it as that. Although some individual devotees may have given some license to that definition. But if we don't redefine it as that, then the other solution might be the only one that, when we have history of, hundreds of years, and someone says, hey, did we ever take a survey of how many initiates still follow the fourth principle? Oh, that'd be a good idea. Okay. Well, no one under 50 is following it. Oh, okay, what do we do? So I'm sure ISKCON is going to, come to that at some point. How do we deal with this? 98.93% of devotees, under 35 have challenges with this, quite frequently. Or even if it's 60% or 70%, it's still a lot. What do we do? Something like that has to happen. Otherwise, how do you answer this question? Someone says, I can't follow, and my husband's, he's going to go off with another girl. How do you answer that question? If I say, yes, do it, then someone will say, but you're not representing Prabhupada. If I say, don't do it, then the wife says, but I'm going to lose my husband, and I won't have a husband, and my child won't have a father. So what do you do? That's why I say, ask your guru. He'll tell you what to do. I'm off the hook. But I think there is a consideration of initiation. At what age do you want to get initiated? Because when you make that vow and you can't follow it, there's a lot of guilt there. And it can disturb your relationship with your guru. Whereas before you make that vow and you don't follow, it's like, well, you never vowed. I mean, maybe you internally promised, but you never publicly did it. Right?
Well, what about for those that are married but not devotees?
Yeah. Already married or married before they're devotees? Yeah. That's it. And they want to get it. And they want to get initiated.
Husband or wife, which is
yeah. So it may be better they wait because it could be problematic for their husbands. That's another issue. This is the real world. In China, most of the women, their husbands aren't devotees. They joined and their husbands didn't. Probably more than anywhere in the world I've been. Are women married to non-devotee men. And men, there's a joke that say, what does a woman have to do to be sexually stimulated? So they have to talk and hug or whatever stimulates them. And say, when is a woman ready? So all these things have to be done. And said, when is a man ready? Anytime. That's the joke. So obviously they're married to men who aren't devotees. So it is definitely an issue. So these things have to be considered. It's just not such a big problem if they're not initiated. It becomes more of a problem if you're initiated. And obviously easier if your husband's supportive. Right? These are things that have not, no one's wrote a book about this, right? There needs to be a book. There needs to be a course to deal with all these things. So this is the real world behind the scenes that everyone goes through, right? Yes? Everybody. Everyone has a material body, so everybody deals with it. You can follow, your husband can't. Your husband can follow, you can't. You both can follow, but you slip. It happens. That's real. And you both follow for 10 years, and then something happens. Whatever, who knows? You hit midlife crisis. And you realize, I suppressed myself in my youth. I'm going crazy now. I'm 50 years old, I'm looking at the 20-year-old girls. I don't know what to do. This is the real world, So that's why I wanted to do this topic, because I don't want devotees to end up in that situation by artificially believing there's something they're not and not dealing with it, and then finding out later when they're 50 they completely suppressed a part of themselves that's just exploding and they can't deal with it. So we don't want to do that. Right? But I think it's important that what I said that Prabhupada said when people weren't following the principles, he said, why did you take initiation? It was like, it's okay you don't follow, but just if you take initiation, then you promise you have to follow. So that's the impression I got. It's like he's not forcing anybody to follow. It's voluntary. It's voluntary. So if you're volunteering for it and why are you volunteering for it if you don't intend to do it? Of course, sometimes you think you can do it. That's another thing. But if you're not sure, then wait. I don't know what else to say. Yes. I mean, I can say more privately, as needed, but publicly, that's the best I could do. Yes?
Be it any kind of need or austerity, the question is how to identify how much is
Oh,
too
yeah.
much and
How much is too much? Yeah, that was what the course was supposed to be about. How much is too much and how much is too little? Let's use the lotto example. I think eating example is good because we all know when we've eaten enough. Isn't it? Like, you know. You're still hungry, but you know, if I stop eating now in a half hour, I won't be hungry. Right? But right now I'm still hungry because that sweet was really good. Yeah. I'm looking at the sweet and I'd like to eat more. But I don't need to. There's no reason. So it's something like that. We have to look at our life and say, how much do I need to eat? Because the word adyahara is not just eating, it's all the senses. What you're eating through your senses. How much do I need to eat? So I can be stable and steady in my bhakti. And I think just by discussing this topic, or I'm hoping, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm hoping by discussing this topic, it'll give you perspective to start to understand what I would call your 0 point is. That point where there's not too much and not too little, so that you can be steady. So how many ladus do I need? What's the quality of the ladu? Do I need more ladus some days? Can I go for a while without ladus? What will happen if I don't eat any ladus this month? Will I eat twice as many next month? These are questions you have to ask yourself. And I think part of the problem in answering these questions is that some of us will have a hard time admitting that we're not up here because we see ourselves up here. And in asking these questions, you might actually find out that you're here, or you'll have to admit you're here. But I think it's extremely important to know where you are and be okay with it. You know, psychologically be fine with it. It's just where you are. It's like, you know, here we are on the map. You know, there's no need to lament. It's just where we are, and we're going, and this is where we are now. So it's something like that. It's just, I'm analyzing what's my global positioning right now in Krishna consciousness. I thought it was here, but actually it's here, and I just have to acknowledge that and be okay with it. And if that's difficult to do, it may be difficult for you to figure out exactly what you need and what you don't need, right? Or like you're a brahmachari. So you might think, well, as a brahmachari, I shouldn't need this, right? But maybe you do, and that's hard to see it, or it may be hard to admit it, right? Because it doesn't fit with your ashram, or it may not fit with your self-conception. I'm supposed to be this. So how do I see what I am if I'm supposed to be this? That requires the ability to be more self-accepting.
And sometimes you are expected to be like this.
Yeah, that makes it even more complicated. I mean, you may be expected to be, and you're trying your best to be, but you are what you are, and that's what you have to acknowledge. And then you work from that platform. But if you don't acknowledge where you are, you're not working from a real platform. I'm not saying to compromise, minimize, give up, or whatever. I'm just saying there is a reality. You are here on the map. Okay, you're supposed to be further, but the reality is you're here, and you can't think you're further, because how are you going to get to your destination if you don't know where you are? So it's just an acknowledgement. This is where I am. It's actually simple, isn't it? This is where I am, but we're making believe we're somewhere else. So stop making believe and just acknowledge, and it's okay that you're there because you can't be anywhere else. That's where you are. You had 1,000,000 lifetimes that made you who you are, and you're trying your best to be Krishna conscious, and of course you can be more advanced, but right now, this is where you are on the map. So just accept it. Don't pretend you're somewhere else. And then it'll be easy to see what you need. But if you think you're up here, then you're going to feed yourself on this level. And it's not going to work because you need to feed yourself on this level. Because you're on this level, you need a different diet than this level. That's where the problem comes. And then you turn 50 and you go, oh God, I'm starving. Because I never fed myself because I thought it was up here. And you turn 50 and you realize, actually, I was always down here. And now I've got 20 years to make up for the loss of ladus. Right? So I go crazy eating ladus. And then the 50-year-old marries the 20-year-old. Because he didn't get any ladus. Right? Have you seen that? And you're trying to figure out, how did that happen? Not enough ladus. Or the marriage was really bad ladus. They were salted the ladus. Something. I mean, you can't prevent all these things. I'm generalizing. But you understand the idea, right? There's a few questions here. I just want to take them because I think they're good questions. Or they're comments. And then we'll end class. And if any of you have to go now, it's fine. It's 6:30 and I don't want to keep you here. So you will not offend me if you go. I will forgive you 100 times.
Yes, let's say something about the seminar you're doing in February.
Can I say something about it? Yeah.
Or is it possible to participate half the day?
It is, but you have to tell us in advance so we know. The difference between these courses and the seminars, in the seminar we'll actually do these exercises where you'll start to, take everything that we're talking about and then reflect on it and start to look at where I think I'm at, where I am at, how many ladus I need. That's very important. Because if you're going to make it your whole life in Krishna consciousness, you have to have that. Because it's, statistically speaking, more people don't make it than do, or they don't make it so well. Okay, if some austerities produce uncomfortable situations, how can we always be happy in Krishna consciousness then? That's not a helpful austerity. So do austerities that are helpful. We need a chopper retreat in Mauritius. Okay, organize it. I just met a devotee here who was going to organize something and then he disappeared. So I don't think it's happening. Or he has my wrong number or something. And I can't remember his name, but he was here with Lokanath Maharaj. He's a Grihastha from Mauritius. So Vrindavani, you should know him. You can get in touch with him. Aditi says, usually you are teaching us to strive for the best, to become a better devotee. Also in deity worship, we should offer the best. When we are happy with 5, will we ever reach 10? It's a good question. You remember the example I was giving? Maybe 5 is all you can do. So she's saying, well, we're always telling you to go to 10. How can I be happy with 5? I think it's the same answer, because that's where you are. So if you're pretending to be on 10, but you're actually on 5, you won't be happy. Yes?
And in this situation where there's this bad relationship, so say there's bad relationships and they stay in life, and then there's still this need to have some affectionate relationship to let go of the attachment to it. Okay, so right now we can renounce. Then in that situation, then still the need is there, so the need should be fulfilled in a Krishna conscious way, right? So then still, then there can be shame and guilt and everything at that point anyway, right? So then how is it, how to...
What's better? You're saying, is it better not to fulfill that need because there's so much guilt?
Well, I don't know. I mean, surely it's better to fulfill it in a Krishna conscious way.
Yeah.
Then leave your body with still these weird desires and not fulfilled.
And but the complicated part is it may not be possible also.
Yeah. But I mean, surely you can fulfill it in the best way possible, right? And then there's this whole process of letting go. In a way, it's like grieving. It's
Yeah.
gradually you fulfill what you can and then you let go of what you can't.
Practical, realistic.
Yeah.
That's important. Because things are not perfect, and everything I'm saying, you may not get the good ladus.
Yeah.
Karmically, you may not get the ladus, and then you have to tolerate whatever you have. Or you may get the ladus, you find the partner, but they're not made well, and that's your karma, and what can you do, right? So then I would say, in a situation like that, like let's say if we use you as an example, and say, you would like to have a nice relationship, but maybe it's not happening at this point, karmically, or for whatever reason, it's just, or maybe you're not ready, or whatever, stars aren't ready. But you like music, so then you put more energy into that, so you fulfill yourself. Next week we're going to discuss this verse in the Gita, that satisfaction is an austerity. To be satisfied is an austerity. So maybe I can't get this thing that I feel I need. What can I do to be satisfied? If I can't get that, are there other things I can do that would nurture me? So like for you, music or art, what you like to do will nurture you. Of course you do it for Krishna. And even though you want this, ladu, you're eating dates and nuts and it's okay, it satisfies that need for sweets, so you can live without the ladu, something like that. Does that make sense? Yes? No? Maybe? Okay. I just want to see if there's anything else. No one can write that book because it is practical. It will be criticized. It's going to be a tough book to write. It would definitely be a bestseller. I was going to write an article, and I think I wrote it and decided not to send it. Actually, I asked people, should I send it and put it on Dandavats, and they're saying no. And it disappeared from my computer. I can't find it. It was called the 3.5 Regulative Principles. So I think I could have gotten in trouble for writing it, but in the future world of ISKCON, the book will have to be written. It has to be talked about because devotees need to know practically how to deal with it. And my personal experience realization is Prabhupada felt that if you're very absorbed in Krishna consciousness and tasting it, you don't need anything material. You're satisfied. The problem is what happens on that day you're not tasting it, right? Yeah, then that's a problem. Or that week, or that month, or that decade. So these are real things we have to deal with. Of course, I say, ask your guru, and you go, my guru is a sannyasi, he won't talk to me about it. Somebody's got to talk about it. Right? Someone's got to help you. And I spoke with one of my godbrothers. He says, well, I have grihastas to deal with these questions. So I said, they're the best. They're the best ones. He's a sannyasi, so they're the best to deal with it. So yeah, go to the grihasta, ask them. And, I don't necessarily think everyone's going to agree on what the best thing is. Americans think differently than Indians, than Eastern Europeans. I've seen that. But we're reading the same books, but culturally we look at things differently. So that's another factor to consider. Okay, can we end? And we'll continue this topic. Oh, I won't be here next week. I'll be in Bangalore. If I can, I'll give the class from Bangalore. If not, then we'll continue the topic when I get back. Okay? Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Go Premanandi Hari.